Copper. No one will talk to me because they think I'm in here for the big first-degree murder. And they should keep thinking that way. Even though Randall was my best friend in the whole goddamn world. I wouldn't even dream of hurting him. Well, maybe I slapped him on the back of the head once or twice while playing Halo. Or I punched him that time he spent his portion of the rent on that stupid, half-assed eagle tattoo on his arm. If I have to say I killed him, then I killed him. It started in April. You know, you can only wait for hope and change so long before you gotta make something change for yourself. You start looking around and you see Enron and Wall Street and pretty much everyone else grab anything not bolted down and then hop out of the plane with their golden parachutes printed out of your tax dollars going to wherever they go to hide their money. You start wondering, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, barely finding any work. When are you going to join the mob and grab whatever you can that's not tied down and head for the exit? When you're really only good at one or two things and they involve drywalling and painting new houses, new offices and new restaurant interiors, and then suddenly all those projects you're working on are just not worth finishing to those people, and the projects they say they got lined up for you for the next year dry up, you start thinking about what stuff is left lying around those sites. I remember the day Randall and I were smoking weed and playing Halo and thinking about how we'd pay for our next Taco Bell trip. Randall was in the kitchen, and he started shouting, "Copper, copper, 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 copper," at the top of his lungs. He came out with this big, high grin, stretched ear to ear, and his long red hair fluttered about as he jumped up and down. It wasn't too long until we were tearing stuff out of the back of the pickup to make sure it was as open and free as possible. Randall folded up a tarp and weighed it down with some bricks he tossed in the back. I didn't know why he did that at first, or what it had to do with copper, until he rolled up to one of our old job sites. It was some cul-de-sac under construction not far from the lake, about 5 or 6 houses. It was a prime property for the up-and-coming folks who apparently had lost everything, and so now it was just abandoned. It had been at least 3, maybe 5 weeks since either of us had any work on that site. All of the rental vehicles were apparently loaded up and trucked out along with the porta potties, but pallets of cinder blocks, cargo containers of drywall, and racks of paint were still stacked up in front of the half-finished buildings. We shined our flashlights around, gawking at the lack of progress and the weather damage done to the half-built Tyvek-wrapped structures. It was like a war zone from a movie, but no bombs fell, only the stocks, then the jobs. There used to be a security guard who would sit on the winding gravel road and stop people from doing what we were able to do, but apparently the money dried up for that as well, as his truck was nowhere in sight. Randall was still manically whispering, "Copper, copper, 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 copper," as he waved his flashlight around the maze of corrugated steel. Finally, after peering through the bus-sized cavernous storage containers, we found it. Number 1 insulated 10 and 12 grade copper wire. There was a mountain of it still wound up in its original packaging. "Come on," he said, taking a contractor knife to the cardboard, liberating the rolls and punching out the plastic reel. "We can't sell this as it is. It's got to look like salvage." "How come?" I asked. "Because we won't just look like thieves. We will definitely be thieves." "What's this going for?" I asked. "Believe it or not, about $2.50 a pound, minus the plastic. Each of these are about 50 pounds, minus about 10 pounds of plastic, so you do the math." I started counting on my fingers. "It's about 110 a reel, so come on," Randall encouraged me. Writing this now, I realize it was actually about 100 a reel. We cleaned out the cargo container of all 7 reels. It was hard work, because Randall and I were pretty lean dudes, and lifting anything but a couple of paint cans at once was pretty much out of our wheelhouse. Randall, despite being bad at math, was really good at stealing. He covered the coils of copper with the tarp and the used bricks to hold it down as we drove. Despite this, I was on pins and needles, and probably a little weed paranoid as we drove home. So, we'll go to Marv's Metal and Scrap first thing in the morning and pick up that fat check. Problem solved, Randall insisted. That night we were so pleased with our findings, we drank a crap ton of whiskey. In the blurry-eyed haze of the 1 p.m. sun, we finally made it over to Marv's. June, Marv's daughter, rolled her cutting blue eyes as we rolled into the salvage bay. She was short, with a bob cut, dark hair, and her face and overalls were covered in grease stains, cuts, and burns. Her work gloves made her hands look almost as big as her face. Randall had a thing for June since high school, and between exchanging ham-fisted innuendos involving heating up and pounding down metal, she eventually had enough of his shit and tossed her clipboard at his head, and then yelled to her father. Marv kicked open the screen door to his office and trotted out to see us. He was also in mangled coveralls with patches of curly salt and pepper hair popping out from his Detroit Lions cap. Marv looked at us, looked at the coil wire, looked at us again. It felt like I was the first time buying beer with a fake ID all over again. "All right, boys," he said, biting a wad of chewing tobacco. "No bullshit. Where'd you find this?" I started with a stutter, and he fired a wad of the thick, brown spit next to my foot with precision aim. "Skip that story. Tell me the real one." "What does it matter?" Randall's face tended to get red after he drank, while he drank, and when he got irate. And right now his face was turning nearly the same shade of red as his hair. "You strip it down, you melt it down, it's gone. It doesn't matter where we got it. Now, how about that $2.50 a pound?" $2.50 a pound. That's rich. Look here, boys. This ain't how it works. You bring me some product marked with a 5-finger discount, you're going to sell it to me at a 5-finger discount. Seeing the fact your profits are still 100%, I doubt either of you are going to complain or provide a receipt. Didn't think so. June, would you be so kind as to mark up these fine upstanding gentlemen down for 250 pounds of grade B copper scrap? Randall leaped out of the back of the truck. "That's $1.60 a pound. Then we made out well today, gentlemen. Didn't we all?" "This is robbery." Randall got even more heated. "Hello, Kettle. Meet Big Daddy, the pot." Based on how Randall looked at me, I don't think he understood the reference or the expression. "Now, get out of here, unless you have something else to trade." We kicked the load of wire out of the back of the truck, out of the tailgate, and Randall peeled out on the gravel with a check worth $400 in hand. We let a few heated miles pass between us and the ripoff before I started talking. "Hey man, it's still free money. How many other abandoned job sites in the UP do you know of? And how many do we not know of yet?" "Nobody's putting any money into these buildings anymore. They're unguarded, and no one has gone around and picked up the leftovers. You know, it took us, 2 hours last night? Look, man, I don't know about you, but do you remember James Gladson?" Randall tilted his head. "That nerd that went to Marquette for biochemistry or whatever?" "Yeah, that nerd with the college degree. I don't think he's making $200 an hour, but we are," I said triumphantly. "Those are good points, Rob. Here I was wondering when you were going to be contributing your brains to this whole operation. Do you remember that job we pulled? That call center just off H58? That was like September. I think Jamie Miller applied to work there. Did she ever get that job?" "She did, but they never actually called her in for it. I think they almost finished it, right? The keyword being almost. Yeah, it's got tons of wire in it. It's practically a copper mine. Let's cash this check, get something to eat, and figure this out." We sat around most of the rest of the day playing video games, eating Taco Bell. At 9, we started planning our little excursion, and when 10 rolled around, we hopped in the pickup again and thundered off to the lakeside call center. Halfway down the winding paved parking lot, we killed the headlights. The full moon was bright enough to illuminate the unfinished strip mall-like building and the shiny black driveway. Exposed insulation and plywood boards over the doors and windows gave away its abandoned status. Randall came out swinging with a sledgehammer center mass on the plywood door. It splintered and gave us access to the white and blue painted interior. That fresh, chemically carpet smell was thick even in the chilly air. "You were working here. Where's the main call pit?" Randall said as he peeked around several rooms extending out from the lobby. "Where's all the wires?" I swung him through the first couple of rooms, some of which were complete, some of which were still just stud frames of walls until we got back into the pit room. There was still no furniture or computer setup, but there were junction boxes scattered every 10 feet or so, on the walls and several in the middle of the room. I remember there was a false floor underneath where the wires were coiled together into some large device that managed all the internet connections for what would have been dozens and dozens of computers. Randall took no time to smash the nodes in the wall with the sludge, exposing high-quality wire. He put on his work gloves and ripped enough wire out of the box to coil it around his glove a few times. Then, with all his strength, practically falling backwards, he yanked the wires out of the wall, unzipping the drywall as he tugged away. It got stuck on something in the ceiling, and even with both of our weight, practically leaning backwards almost horizontally, we couldn't get it to budge any further. Then I had an idea. We backed up the pickup as close to the lobby door as possible and hitched up the tow strap in the back. We ran the tow strap into the pit room and tied several junction boxes of wires together, and then tied them to the strap. The whole room looked like a spider web of copper wire spokes running all to the tow strap. As much as I and Randall wanted to see what would happen to the room inside in real time, we both decided that we didn't want to get caught in case we brought the whole place down. Randall let out a maniacal laugh, like the dumb hyena in Lion King, as he pressed down on the gas, and with relative ease, we pulled hundreds of dollars of wire out of the wall, ceiling, and false floor of the call center. The building seemed to cough out a cloud of drywall dust. As it settled, we looked on in amazement behind the truck. Coiled, stretched, frayed, and covered in drywall dust, the copper filled the parking lot like barbed wire over a battlefield. All we had to do now was cut it up and wrap it up and throw it in the back. It took us about an hour to put most of it coiled into the truck bed. The pickup suspension was sagging a bit, which meant we definitely had more in total than the previous night's score. Plus, despite the damage we did, it was the highest possible quality of wire available. Randall went to inspect the damage in the pit room and assess whether it was worthless or not to keep pulling more wire out of the lobby or the false floor. He left me to finish cutting and wrapping up the mess outside. As I was getting more and more fed up with this job, while Randall took his sweet time inside, I started to notice the soft lapping of the lake in the distance, but everything else had this unnatural stillness about it. It was the same stillness I felt that one time Randall and I were playing paintball and he ambushed me from behind and tore into my back with 20 paintballs at close range. Really uneasy stuff. I thought I heard something coming up from the tree line to the right of the building, so I stopped what I was doing and lifted up my flashlight and scanned the trees. There wasn't much in the way of brush or weed growth yet, so I could see pretty far into the woods. Amongst the fallen branches, I noticed a strange pair of what first I thought were twigs, but then I came to realize as they moved that they were antlers. I breathed a sigh of relief at first, noting it was probably a buck, maybe even a moose. I wasn't sure which, because its head was still behind a thick tree. I traced the light slowly across the animal to see if I could tell what it was from its backside. To my amazement, I found my flashlight beam reflecting off a brilliant, reflective, jet-black creature. Its body was covered in the shiniest fur that seemed to crawl, almost like a light shining on floor tiles or even snake-like scales. I took 2 steps back as I noticed its enormously long tail swinging around the tree, almost like a corkscrew. It was several times the length of the creature's body, and it seemed to float magically in the air. The most jarring feature was the stegosaurus-like plates or spikes running down the back of whatever this was. I held my breath as the creature's rear moved behind the tree, and I moved the flashlight with it. I could now see the face and head of the monster. 2 white fangs protruded from its wildcat-like face. Its cat-like ears moved forward, as did its array of woody antlers. I stood stunned by its brilliant, perfectly round yellow eyes, ringing black diamond-shaped pupils which widened as it seemed to stare me down from over 100 feet away. The flashlight began to shake in my hand as I watched this powerful monster leap onto the tree like a cat leaps onto a scratching post. Its body, legs, and enormous webbed feet stretched easily 10 feet up on the trunk. It had claws, bright white and sharp like eagle's talons, and they stuck into the tree with ease. Its serpentine-like tail expanded, revealing a food processor-like array of dagger-like spikes before it wrapped itself around the tree, splintering the bark and exploding the tree in a single whipsaw-like action. It opened its mouth, and I was expecting a lion or tiger-like roar, but instead all I could hear was a sound that mixed thunder with a waterfall before it faded from sight like the Cheshire Cat himself. I screamed as loud as I ever screamed and bolted for the truck. Randall heard me and came out running. He instinctively sealed the tailgate, tossed the tarp over the wire, and chucked 2 of the bricks on top. "Cops! Where?" he said, jumping into the cab. I didn't reply. I just gunned the truck back up the moonlit parking lot. Randall, with his head on a swivel, peered around for the cops that weren't there. "Where are they, dude?" he asked me after he hit his head on the roof after I jumped across a concrete wheel stop to take a more direct path off the property. I kept my body stiffer than a board, and I ate a lot of that bump in my stomach as I struggled to keep the truck straight on the muddy ground between asphalt segments. I didn't say cops. I said, "Ah!" "Well, wait, there's some wire left. What the hell? What did you see?" "I saw something big. Something really big with antlers." "Was it a Wendigo?" Randall's head turning had become more frantic as he pulled a .45 handgun out from under the seat and started to point it out the window. "It wasn't a Wendigo, Randall." "Fuck, skinwalkers then." "God damn it! It wasn't either of those things. It looked like a big cat with antlers and a huge tail with stegosaurus plates." A few minutes passed, and then Randall started to crack up as I sped onto the open road. He kept laughing harder and harder and eventually decocked the pistol and returned it to its spot under the seat. Have you been holding out on me, buddy?" "Fuck off," I told Randall. Randall managed to ask if I was okay to drive between laughing at me. I told him I knew what I saw. "Well, while you were outside getting really high apparently, I had a great idea. What if I borrow my uncle's boat and we hop over to Canada and sell the wire there? Everything costs more in Canada. We'll make even more money off of the score." We both knew going across the lake into Canada was pretty easy, and so would be getting back. You could evade a lot of the Mounties and cops by maneuvering close to the island. Of course, we didn't really have a plan to move the hundreds of pounds of wire from the boat to a metal scavenger in Canada, but then we got into touch with a metal trader up there who said we could meet him up on the lake at night and make the transfer and payment up there. So we borrowed Randall's Uncle Jack's boat, a 30-foot power boat called the Thunderbird. Its hull and interior was discolored with a yellow urine-like stain, and the motor ran terribly. I wondered if we even make it 50 miles or so voyage to meet up near the island, especially since we weren't able to go very fast and were weighed down because of all the wire. About halfway there, we made contact with our buyer. He said he had all $1,000 ready to go. We killed the lights as we skirted the water boundary and slipped into the Canadian waters like it was nothing. Our meetup point was a small island just south of the center of Mishkapatan. We fired up the hued lights on the powerboat as we approached the island. In the distance, in this tiny sliver of daylight left, we could see our buyer's boat with a flashing light through Uncle Jack's shattered binoculars. I went up to the bow while Randall steered. Cold sprayed over me as we bobbed over the short waves of the black waters. I watched through the binoculars the buyer's boat and periodically yelled back to Randall to turn left or right. When we got close enough, I could see the buyer's boat was locked up on a sandbar, and the interior of the ship was covered in a slick of blood. Our radio calls went unanswered. Randall insisted on approaching the beach ship carefully. He talked me into seeing what happened and possibly launching some flares before leaving the area. I honestly think he just wanted to see if our money was still on board. We crept up to the side of the buyer's boat, and to our amazement, we found the vessel was in fact not, as it appeared further out, beached on anything at all, but it was adrift in a calm section of the lake beside the island. We circled the boat, shining all of our lights on it. We could not find any sign of any occupant, only blood. Randall and I argued about whether or not to board the boat and check below deck for the buyer and the cash. He grabbed his handgun and the biggest flashlight on the ship and steadied himself on the edge of our boat as I told him it was a very, very bad idea. That's when our boat was hit from the lakeside, and it tossed us into the buyer's boat and sent Randall and I hurtling to our deck. Our ship seemed to lift out of the water like we were beached on something ourselves now. I heard metal scrape and buckle as we were suddenly dropped back into the lake. The motor died, and one by one the deck lights dimmed out. Randall's flashlight went flying onto the other ship. It was pointed towards the island, away from us. I still had mine in my hand. Randall flopped on the deck like a fish after his handgun, while I scanned the lake side of the boat with the light. In the black-on-black water, I could see something long and thin float for a second before submerging. With the rattle of the motor gone, I could hear something churning under the water. After retrieving his pistol, Randall tried to get the motor to turn over. Two loud thuds attracted my attention to the other boat as I saw it again. Two massive webbed paws, coated in the silkiest black fur or the shiniest of scales, dug into the side of that boat. And a massive antlered head of a large black panther rose up as if it levitated by unnatural forces. I could see the shine of its fur or scales almost like a Christmas ornament. Its diamond eyes expanded to become entirely black as its antlers shifted about. Its tongue was forked and shone like broken glass. It roared with the sound of a winter squall, a tornado, and the rush of a fire hydrant all at once. It leapt across both boats with its tail swirling in the air like a water spout. Randall was too stunned to open fire as the tail exploded into the spines and cut into Randall at roughly chest height and swept his two parts into the lake. A whirlpool formed and drew Randall's remains into the vortex. It was also drawing in Jack's boat, so I hurried across into the buyer's ship. Slipping on the bloody deck and hitting my head, I blacked out. I came to, surrounded by Mounties, or Coast Guard, whatever they're called, several of them with their guns drawn. I saw the remains of Uncle Jack's boat barely seaworthy, under tow by the Canadian Coast Guard cutters. The aft section, motor, and controls were all but torn away. It listed into the lake, and not a trace of the copper wire remained. I was read my rights and hauled away. As my head recovered from the concussion, I heard a word in the back of my head, a word I had never heard before, and a word I didn't know the meaning to. Every time the word cropped up, it was never said in the voice of my head. It was said in the rushing, stormy voice of that monster. The word was Mishipeshu, When I was interrogated, I could only say that word in response to every question. And for the first few days, it was the only word I could write, no matter how much I tried to write something else. Anything else. When I was being extradited back to America, one of the Mounties or Coast Guards or whatever they were told me what that word meant. It was a native legend about an underwater wildcat with the antlers of a great buck and the tail of a great snake. It guarded the lake, preserved the copper of the region, and fought the great thunderbirds, a sort of yin to the wildcat's yang. By this time I could talk, and I asked what a thunderbird looked like, and I was shown some totem poles with the eagle head and wings. It didn't occur to me until now, writing this, why Randall was the target. He had that crummy, half-assed eagle tattoo on his arm. Then, of course, there was the obvious fact we were moving the cat's prize, the copper. I was charged with a number of crimes, any one of which I may end up serving 5 to 10 years for. I was also suspected of the murder of the buyer, even though they couldn't determine, nor have I told them yet, or the American cops, what I was doing up there and with whom. I got the sense they didn't even know about Randall or the copper, since no trace of either were recovered. I asked the Mountie, who knew about the Mishipishu, what else he knew about it. I asked him whether or not it was still coming after me. He said the only legends, the only stories he knew of, were from people who died, mysteriously, after their encounter, shortly after they had the chance to tell their story. I've been here in the UP jail a few weeks, maybe a month. My lawyer said it would be better if I just kept my mouth shut. He thinks if I keep my mouth shut, I'll be out soon, and maybe get off entirely. Little does he know I'm writing all this down, as a confession of as many crimes as I could possibly confess to. I wanted to get my story, my crimes told, so I can stay inside this fortress of steel and concrete for a very long time. Maybe, hopefully, forever. I think I'm safe from that creature, the Mishipishu, in here.